Are you wearing the pants? He's
Oh,
wearing the
crap.
pants. All right.
Yes.
Red pants.
We have red
TLP
pants.
red pants. So for those of you who don't know, 2.5 years ago at RSA, Chris, when he was the director of CISA, and I went up on stage at RSA, and we gave a 25-minute talk covering trends and things that we were seeing. Probably the biggest thing that came out of that was, of course, the eventual rise of ransomware. But the big joke that we had is that we were both wearing red pants. Those of you who are not familiar with how threat intelligence works, there are different color codes like traffic lights. So TLP, traffic light protocol, green, share with anybody, yellow, some people, and then the special is red. So the big joke, thank you, Patrick Miller, is that we are hashtag TLP red pants. So Chris,
Jokes tend
thank
to
you
be
so much.
funny though, Bryson. So I'm not
What's
sure
that?
it's a joke.
Oh, yeah, okay, well. All right, so I'll let you kick off since you're obviously in a difficult situation calling in from home. Really appreciate you tackling all the family issues to still be able to join us online. Let's kick it off with some of your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Bryson, for pulling this event off today. Again, I apologize not being able to be there this evening. My better half managed to come down with a case of COVID. Much like almost everybody else that went to, I guess, the most distinguished super spreader event Saturday evening at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So I'm managing that and a few kids. And I fortunately am still testing negative. I've had it twice, though. So I feel like, it was time for somebody else in the house to have it. Well, so again, I think this is an important event. It's an important time right now. About a year out, I think, from at least this administration, some of the major milestones. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the executive order to improve American cybersecurity. And just in reflection, I thought that was a remarkable document. It really set out a clear path and kind of a beacon for improved cybersecurity for the nation. As companies ask me, hey, what should we make of this? I said, first and foremost, you should look at it as a roadmap. If you're not doing the things at a minimum that are in that executive order, then you need to reevaluate your strategy. I think the second thing it does, though, is, and most importantly, is it finally realizes the key point, probably the greatest point of leverage that the United States federal government has in defense of cybersecurity, and that is the power of the purse. The U.S. federal government is one of the largest purchasers of IT services, hardware, software, everything in between, in the world. In fact, I'd suggest that the Department of Defense is likely the single largest purchaser of IT services and software. And that's a great thing, but we need to be able to use that to affect change and shape the ecosystem around us. And so through that executive order of saying effectively, you must be this tall to ride the federal government contracting, the procurement process, it's going to raise the standard in the level of cybersecurity and safety in the products, the software products that the government buys. But here's the kicker, right? Is that software companies are not going to bifurcate their code base for the federal government and then for everyone else in the commercial sector. So there's a cascading benefit by the federal government, again, finally moving away from a lowest cost, technically acceptable approach and setting a higher bar. So not only, again, does the federal government benefit, but everyone else benefits. So again, coming up on May 23rd and the anniversary of the executive order, I think it is time to reflect. Now, progress is always a hard thing. I think some of the metrics and goalposts set forth in the executive order were pretty aggressive. And if we know anything, it's at the 101 or 102 or however many civilian agencies there are in the United States government, at least on the civilian side, is they're not necessarily resourced. They don't necessarily fit into the overarching governance structure, and they don't always have the oversight in place. And that's something that the federal government, the legislative branch needs to fix.
So let's tackle that part you said there. You said the executive orders come out, and you noted to the audience that, hey, you should be taking this seriously if you haven't already. And the common refrain in a lot of places is to shout a country name with an exclamation point, Russia, 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 and then we're supposed to do something, right? You're still keeping your hands in, of course, awareness of what's happening geopolitically. We know that Russia and China and Iran have been doing things iteratively against our critical infrastructure going back publicly at least 11 years, 12 years. So how much, considering that there is Russia very much on the forefront with what they're doing in Ukraine, which, of course, going back the last 7 years, critical infrastructure has been a significant part. How much do we need to really worry about what they might do here?
Well, so first off, let's kind of separate things out for a second. The state actor level threat tends to be a targeted, tends to be no, I don't want to say fairly sophisticated, but it falls into a bucket of if you meet a certain profile, then you are going to be within the targeting sets and targeting list of state actors like the Russian SVR. But that's over here, right? There's a baseline and a foundational risk that every single organization, critical infrastructure, government, NGOs, academia, it doesn't matter. If you are connected to the internet, which means if you're doing mail, if you're doing any sort of online banking, if you're doing anything that touches the public internet, you are on the playing field for that threat. And that threat right now, as I see it, is ransomware actors. Ransomware actors are simply savvy business people that have figured out how to monetize the raft of misconfigurations and vulnerabilities, unpatched devices, open ports, RDP, and stupid human tricks that happen in every single organization on a daily basis. So that is every single organization's baseline. That's it, period. But if you fit, to your point, Bryson, if you fit into a set of sectors and threat profiles, then you have to up your game. And that's what's actually been fascinating, I think, over the last couple of years is the strategic shifts in targeting. The SVR, Nobelium, Holiday Bear, whatever you want to call it, SolarWinds, that should have been the eye opener from a software supply chain perspective. If not Petya didn't open it up before SolarWinds, that should have been number two. And then if you look at what's happened in Ukraine and perhaps some of the wiper attacks that have happened. But you've got to be thinking through what your baseline is and then how you may or may not fit into a targeting set for an adversary. And unfortunately, and this is one of those kind of those offensive, whether it's a mantra or whatever, where, the offense knows the adversary's networks better than the defense does. You know what? They tend to know exactly how the more sophisticated adversaries tend to know the products that we use better than I think the blue team does. I mean, I'd ask how many of you out there knew what the Orion platform was when that broke. So we've got to work closer together between the InfoSec teams and the IT operations team that deploy and manage the networks on a daily basis.
Yeah, so I'll share that. For those of you who don't know my background, I used to be an offensive operator. And security is defined by the threat. This is why we constantly live in the state of anxiety as defenders, because what's about to happen is something that is inherently outside of the system understanding that we have. And on the offensive side, your entire security stack, your entire infrastructure is our test matrix. Any code that I'm building, I'm going to test against your configurations before I deploy it. That's how I know not only is it going to work, but that's also how I know I'm going to be able to operate it for a period of time before you're even able to detect that I'm there. Because I know where you're looking, I know how you're looking, I know how you're configured, I know how your people think. And in some really insidious examples, we've seen incident response where they were inside the defender's loop, right? How they were communicating to understand the threat, the attacker was watching those communications. And so they were a part of the response as well.
Well, there's one thing I think I'd also I'd probably point out here is that there are a lot of conversations about what do we need to do from a legislative perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from a tort law perspective, in terms of changing the way software is engineered, how it's developed, how it's tested, how it's rolled out, how it's maintained. And one of the constant conversations is, do we introduce a product liability approach? Do we take a strict liability approach where if you ship software, the damn thing better be good? It better be good when it comes out of the box. Here's the problem though. Software is incredibly complex. What's compounding the complexity is the fact you have an intelligent adversary that on a daily, hourly, minute, second by second basis is looking for ways never thought of before sometimes to exploit that code. So when you have something like that, where you have that intelligent adversary, it's almost unlike anything else from a product perspective. You can baseline against hurricanes, right? You can baseline against tornadoes. But when you have an intelligent adversary who's constantly evolving, that makes it that much more complicated to change the liability framework around it. I do think, though, that we can take a harder look at the negligence standards and what does good look like? What is that baseline of deployments and operations and maintenance of a network, of code, of everything else? And is there something we can shoot for there? Now, that's going to take a long time. The government still needs to develop whether it's the government developing that framework and whether they have the maturity and sophistication to do that, or that has to evolve through the common law. That's a different question.
So there was a talk today. It was in track 3. Lucian Niedermeyer talked about how to operationalize IEC 62443, which is an ISA standard that is looking at product security that often affects critical infrastructure. I'm here pointing to an auditor who is, used to the compliance against those kinds of standards. But he's working on a framework that they're going to be able to try to push that out. And they're first starting out looking at buildings. So like how, because buildings are no longer just as simple as the ICS there is just HVAC or the security systems. Of course, we know that smart cities are going to fundamentally rely on the increasing amount of sensors that are going to be built into where we live and where we work.
Yeah, I agree with that. And honestly, I was having a conversation about this the other day, and this is not a U.S. focused conversation necessarily, but when you think about the future of Ukraine and how whatever the Marshall 2.0 plan that will roll into Ukraine, that will be the most technologically advanced society in Europe and perhaps in the world once things stabilize and the money flows in. But a lot of that is going to be just that much more attack surface, that much more digital risk landscape that we're going to have to manage. So Lucian's, this is a great concept. One of the challenges though with these standards is that they take time to develop, and it's not like it's a cost-free endeavor, and it takes time. So we're going to have there's a slope that we're going to have to continually work to get ourselves up.
And I mean that's the challenge when we look at OT versus IT. IT, I can change out laptops on a 1 to 2 to 3 year life cycle. OT, I'm looking at capital cost systems that have a 20 to 30 year life cycle. Furthermore, these are not in just a private economy where they can charge whatever they want, right? We are only going to pay so much for electricity. We are only going to pay so much for water. So there's inherent regulated rate base that also constrains what those investments can be. This is where I look to federal government as well. Hey, isn't that what your purpose is, right? You are a centralized resource where we have put money there in terms of the fact that there is also a dearth of technical talent and operational technologies that understand the cybersecurity and computerization aspects. That is a limited resource. Isn't that also where the federal government can be centralizing and helping us? Isn't this kind of the mission that CISA should be doing?
So you just heard Jen say it, right? That they're going on a hiring boost for control system security specialists. And it's something that we had sought to do in the last administration when I was in the seat. Worked with Rick Driggers, who was in the cybersecurity directorate or division there. And, let's pull together the federal government team, everyone that touches control systems related security, whether it's EPA in the water sector, Department of Energy and the grid, Department of Transportation, you name it. Let's bring everybody together so that we can identify what our requirements are and pull resources together, because individually we don't have enough resources, which is a common theme, right? Defenders standing alone are not going to be successful against a focused attack. So how do we pull that together. But to your point is that, even in industry, there's a resource shortage. There's a time distance problem that we need to overcome. These things are not going to get fixed overnight. So it's going to require persistence, going to require patience. It's going to require Congress, in my view, to weigh in and conduct oversight in a meaningful way, and provide the assistance needed to the government, including to CISA. And I've been a big proponent of designating CISA as the center of gravity, center of excellence for industrial control systems security in the federal government. It's up to Congress to make that designation. But I think you need to have one place where you can go get that expertise and guidance from industry into government. And the challenge here is that the threat actors are going to continue to make that shift that we predicted, which was probably the most obvious prediction in the world in 2020, that you would see ransomware shift into the manufacturing space and the control system space, for the very simple reason that you cannot afford downtime on the shop floor, and that you are incentivized. The incentive structures are all in the favor, from the operations and maintenance side to the desire to avoid downtime. It's all in the adversary's favor. So we've got to take what we can to both use our offensive resources and cyber command and the intelligence community to get a better understanding of what the adversary is trying to do, disrupt and exploit and expose their frameworks, like you saw with the End Controller and Pipe Dream disclosures by Mandiant and Dragos a few weeks ago. And then you got to bring it back home and just make us harder targets. So this is one of those cases, again, for ransomware, where it's your baseline. You've just got to be faster than the next guy when the bear is chasing you.
There are a number of officials here from CISA, as well as Meg King and Tim Weston from TSA, who were directly responsible for the security directives that came out in the wake of what was going on with oil and natural gas. So they're here as we break here in a minute. So closing this out and letting you get back to your family, Chris, any last thoughts or big predictions you want to share?
Well, I was hoping you'd give me the same questions you gave Jen about
okay, all right, we could do that.
I've got a magic wand. All right, so magic wand, if you'd asked me that one, you didn't.
All right, it's your magic wand, independent of resources. You wave it. What do you got? Okay,
since this is Hack the Capitol, I'm going to focus on the Congress. Recommendation 1.2 in the Cyberspace Solarium Commission report was about consolidating oversight of cybersecurity within the Congress, a select committee on the House side and the Senate side for cybersecurity. We have to consolidate and streamline the congressional oversight so we can rack and stack investments, and to ensure that we're doing the right things operationally. That's got to start on Congress's side. The executive branch can do it all day long, but if the investments coming in from the Hill, because like my perspective is kind of been, the president's budget tends to be overlooked once it hits the Hill. It's what the committees want to do within their top lines. So we've got to consolidate and centralize authority within the Congress.
All right, and you're not going to get a Rubik's Cube. I'm going to give you just a regular magic crystal ball. One good thing, one bad thing you think is going to happen in the next 5 years in critical infrastructure.
All right, I'm going to flip it around because I don't want to end with a bad thing. So we'll end with a good thing. So let's start with the bad thing. The bad thing is, I think it's inevitable that the kind of volumetrically, the victim space, the victim scape is only going to increase. And I think that's primarily due to a lot of the shifts that organizations are making to third-party providers and outsourcing services that are IT-based. And that's going to lead to an increased number of points of aggregation, which is where the bad guys are going to go. And what that means is you've got a managed service provider that serves a couple hundred companies. Well, those are, in the view of the adversary, a couple hundred targets. And the joke that I've made that's horrible, remember what I said earlier, jokes are funny. This isn't funny, so maybe it's not a joke. But when they asked Willie Sutton, the bank robber, why he robbed banks, he said, that's where the money is. So why would the MSS and the Cloud Hopper campaign in 2018 go after managed service providers? Because that's where the data is. That's where the access is. So if you're an organization and you're managing access, you're managing data for multiple companies, particularly those that could be interesting to a foreign adversary, you now have an increased level of risk. And you need to be thinking about not just what your profile is as an individual company, but how is your risk profile heightened because of the bad guys and what they may be going after. So on the good side, I'm going to cheat a little bit. You said critical infrastructure, but again, we're in the Capitol. So I'm going to talk about what I think Congress can help do and what I think the executive branch needs to do to heal thyself. I see in the next 5 years an increased movement within the executive branch towards a shared service model. This was established a couple of years ago out of CISA with the Quality Service Project that opens up, and whether it's the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program or some of the other like the .gov campaign, some of the DNS resolver services that they've been working on, the more that we can get a centralized set of tools, a centralized set of monitoring and logging in a central place, that is going to advantage the defenders in the 102 different agencies. And ultimately down the road, and this can be assisted if Congress centralizes their own oversight, but I think the majority of federal executive branch agencies, departments and agencies, they should probably just throw the IT operations gig out the window and let another, maybe a U.S. digital services agency should emerge. And kind of on that last note, 5 years from now, I see CISA being a standalone sub-cabinet agency that's outside of the Department of Homeland Security, stands on its own. God knows the mission's big enough, that budget's going to be big enough. Everything we do in the future is going to have some sort of digital dependency on it, and we need that agency like CISA that's out there leading the fight on a daily basis.
Well, appreciate everything that you have done to help put us on the path going back a few years, and for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Bryson. Y'all be good. Stay safe.